Have you ever attended your own funeral without dying? I did. Only no one was crying because they believed I had died. They were crying because my own mother had told them I was gone forever. The strange part? I was standing only a few streets away, breathing the same air, carrying the same name, yet in her heart, I no longer existed. If someone had told me years ago that the woman who kissed my scraped knees, braided my hair before school, and whispered that she'd always protect me would one day erase me from her life, I would have laughed until tears rolled down my face. But life has a cruel way of turning promises into ghosts. My name is Emily. I am 38 years old. And according to my mother's neighbors, relatives, church friends, and even some of my childhood classmates, I died 12 years ago. The truth is far worse. I grew up in a quiet little town where everyone knew everyone else's business before breakfast. My mother, Margaret, was respected everywhere she went. People admired her. They called her generous, strong, faithful. She baked pies for every church fundraiser, visited sick neighbors, remembered every birthday. If you only saw her outside our front door, you'd think she was the kindest woman alive. Inside the house, it was different. Nothing I ever did seemed enough. If I earned an A, she'd ask why it wasn't an A+. If I cleaned the kitchen, she'd point out the one spoon I forgot to wash. If someone complimented me, she'd somehow turn the conversation back to herself. As a little girl, I kept believing that maybe tomorrow she'd finally smile at me the way mothers smiled at their daughters in movies. Tomorrow never came. Still, I loved her. Children always do. Even when love hurts. Especially when love hurts. After my father died from a heart attack, everything changed. I was only 17. The silence inside our home became unbearable. Mother stopped laughing. Stopped singing while making breakfast. Stopped planting flowers. It was as though part of her had been buried with Dad. I tried so hard to help. I got a part-time job after school. Cooked dinner. Paid bills when I could. Cancelled plans with friends. Sometimes I'd sit beside her on the porch for hours without saying a word, hoping my presence alone might ease her pain. One evening I gently rested my head on her shoulder. I miss Dad too. She slowly stood up. Without looking at me, she said, "You have no idea what I've lost." Then she walked inside and locked her bedroom door. That sentence stayed with me for years. Maybe she was right. Maybe grief had stolen the mother I once knew. So I forgave her again. And again. And again. When I turned 24, I met Daniel. He was patient. Funny. The kind of man who remembered tiny details, like how I hated cinnamon in coffee but loved it in apple pie. For the first time in my life, someone looked at me as though I mattered. I couldn't wait for Mother to meet him. Instead, she barely shook his hand. After dinner, she pulled me aside. "He's beneath you." I blinked. What? He doesn't come from the right family. I laughed nervously. I love him. She looked straight into my eyes. Love fades. Family doesn't. I should have paid attention to those words. Because to her, family only existed when everyone obeyed her. Daniel proposed 6 months later. I said yes before he finished asking. That evening, I drove to Mother's house with the ring sparkling on my finger. She opened the door. Looked at my hand. Didn't smile. Didn't hug me. Didn't even say congratulations. Instead, she quietly walked into the kitchen. Opened a drawer. Placed an old family photo album on the table. Inside were pictures of birthdays. Christmas mornings. Beach vacations. Dad holding me as a baby. Mother closed the album with one firm hand. "If you marry him." She paused long enough for my heartbeat to become painfully loud. "Don't ever come back." I laughed because I thought she was joking. She wasn't. I waited for her to smile. She never did. The room suddenly felt colder than winter. Mom. You heard me. You'd choose this over your own daughter? No. She folded her arms. I'm choosing my principles. I stared at the woman standing in front of me. She looked exactly like my mother. But somehow, she wasn't. I walked toward the door, expecting her to stop me. To call my name. To apologize. Anything. My hand reached the doorknob. Still nothing. I stepped outside. The door closed behind me. Not slammed. Not gently. Just closed. I stood on that porch for nearly 10 minutes. Waiting. Every passing second whispered the same heartbreaking truth. She wasn't coming after me. I climbed into my car with tears blurring the windshield. As I drove away, I looked into the rearview mirror one last time. She was standing behind the living room curtain, watching me leave. And she never waved. What I didn't know was that this wouldn't be the last time my mother watched me disappear. Years later, she would make sure everyone else believed I already had. What if the hardest part of losing your mother wasn't her dying? What if it was discovering that she had buried you instead? Not in the ground. Not beneath a headstone. But inside every conversation, every family gathering, every memory she chose to rewrite. The day I drove away from my mother's house, I kept expecting my phone to ring. I imagined her calming down after a few hours. Maybe she'd call and say, "Emily, come home." We were both angry. Maybe she'd even apologize. That call never came. Instead, 3 days later, my aunt called. "Emily, what happened between you and your mother?" I forced a laugh. "Oh, just wedding arguments." There was a long silence. Then my aunt whispered, "She's telling everyone she doesn't have a daughter anymore." The words hit me harder than I expected. What? She said you made your choice, and now she's made hers. I couldn't breathe. I looked across the room where Daniel was assembling the crib we'd bought for the future we dreamed of. He looked up, smiled, and asked, "Everything okay?" I nodded. I lied. "No, everything's fine." But nothing was fine. We got married 6 months later. It wasn't the wedding I'd imagined since I was a little girl. There was no mother helping me into my dress. No tears as she adjusted my veil. No warm hug before I walked down the aisle. Every bride looks toward the front of the church. I kept looking toward the back. Every time the doors opened, my heart leaped. Maybe she'd changed her mind. Maybe she'd surprise me. Maybe she'd realize that love mattered more than pride. The last guest arrived. The doors closed. She never came. As I walked toward Daniel, I smiled because I wanted him to remember our wedding as beautiful. But inside, every step felt heavier than the last. After the ceremony, people danced, laughed, shared stories. I slipped outside alone. Daniel found me standing under the stars. He wrapped his jacket around my shoulders. "You don't have to pretend with me." That was all it took. I broke. The sobs came so suddenly I couldn't even speak. I just wanted my mom. He didn't try to fix it. He simply held me while I cried until there were no tears left. Sometimes love isn't saying the perfect words. Sometimes love is staying silent. For a while, life became peaceful. Daniel and I bought a small house. Nothing fancy. The paint peeled in the hallway. The roof leaked whenever it rained. The kitchen cabinet squeaked every morning. But it was ours. We laughed while fixing broken shelves. Burned dinners together. Painted walls the wrong color and laughed until our stomachs hurt. For the first time, home felt safe. 2 years later, our daughter Sophie was born. The moment I held her, something inside me changed forever. She wrapped her tiny fingers around mine. I whispered through happy tears, "I'll never let you wonder if you're loved." Daniel kissed my forehead. "You already started keeping that promise." When Sophie turned 3 months old, I made a decision. Maybe becoming a grandmother would soften my mother's heart. Maybe she'd finally forgive me. Maybe she'd want to meet her granddaughter. I packed a diaper bag, placed Sophie carefully into her car seat, and drove to my childhood home. Everything looked the same. The white fence, the flower beds, the old oak tree where Dad had hung a swing. I stood on the porch for almost 5 minutes before knocking. The door opened. Mother stared at me. Then her eyes dropped to the baby. For just a second. Just one tiny second. I saw something warm in her expression. Hope exploded inside my chest. "Mom." I smiled through nervous tears. "This is your granddaughter." Silence. Sophie giggled. She reached her tiny hand toward Margaret. "Every baby believes the world is kind." Mother looked at Sophie's little hand. Then back at me. "I told you not to come back." I swallowed hard. "I know, but she's your granddaughter." "No." Her voice was colder than winter ice. "I don't have a granddaughter." I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. "Please. I don't have a daughter." My lips trembled. "Mom." She interrupted me. "The woman who lived here died the day she married against my wishes." I stared at her. Unable to move. Unable to think. Unable to believe that the woman standing inches away from her own grandchild could sound so empty. Sophie started fussing. Mother glanced at the baby one final time. Then she slowly closed the door. Right in our faces. The click of the lock echoed louder than thunder. I stood frozen. Daniel had insisted on coming with me but stayed in the car because I wanted to speak to her alone. He rushed over when he saw me standing motionless. What happened? I couldn't answer. I simply handed him Sophie before my knees gave out. He caught me before I hit the porch. As he carried me back to the car, I looked toward the front window. The curtain moved. She was watching. Again. Watching. But never opening the door. That night, after Sophie finally fell asleep, I sat on the nursery floor. I watched her tiny chest rise and fall. I imagined closing the door on her someday. Pretending she didn't exist. Telling the world she wasn't my child. The thought made me physically sick. I whispered into the darkness, how could anyone do that? Years passed. Birthdays came and went. Christmases passed. Mother never called. Never sent a card. Never asked about Sophie. Not once. Then, one afternoon, while grocery shopping, I ran into an old neighbor from my hometown. She looked at me. Her shopping basket slipped from her hand. Her face turned completely white. She grabbed my arm as if she'd seen a ghost. Her voice shook. "Emily?" I smiled politely. "It's been a long time." She stepped backward. Tears filled her eyes. "But..." She looked terrified. "They told us you were dead." The can she was holding rolled across the supermarket floor. People turned to stare. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. "What did you just say?" She covered her mouth. "Oh, dear God. I came to your funeral." The world seemed to stop spinning. I stared at her, unable to blink. My voice cracked. "My funeral?" She nodded, still trembling. "Your mother told everyone you had passed away years ago." I felt the blood drain from my face. What exactly did she tell them? The old woman looked at me with a mixture of fear and pity. Then she whispered the sentence that shattered whatever remained of my heart. She said she had already buried her only child. Have you ever looked into someone's eyes and realized they were mourning you, while you were standing right in front of them? That is a feeling no one should ever experience. It is like screaming underwater. Your lips move. Your heart pounds. Your tears fall. But somehow, no one hears you. The woman in the grocery store kept staring at me as if I might disappear at any second. Her hands were trembling so badly that another can slipped from her basket and rolled beneath a shelf. I don't understand, she whispered. You look exactly the same. I am the same, I answered softly. I'm alive. Her eyes filled with tears. Oh, Emily. She wrapped her arms around me before I even realized I had started crying. Customers walked around us. Cashiers kept scanning groceries. Children laughed somewhere near the bakery. The whole world continued as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But my world had just cracked open. After a long moment, she gently pulled away. I thought we buried you. Those words echoed through my mind again. Not I thought you moved away. Not I heard you stopped talking to your mother. No. She thought I had been buried. When? I asked. She hesitated. It was about 6 years ago. 6 years. For 6 years, people had believed I no longer existed. Did anyone see a funeral? She slowly shook her head. There wasn't a service. What then? Your mother told everyone it was your final wish to be cremated privately. I closed my eyes. There had been no coffin. No body. No goodbye. Just a story. A lie so complete that an entire town accepted it without question. The woman reached into her purse and pulled out an old folded church bulletin. I don't know why I've kept this. The paper was worn at the edges. Yellowed with time. She handed it to me. There, tucked between announcements about choir practice and Sunday school, was a small paragraph. Please keep Margaret Wilson in your prayers as she mourns the loss of her beloved daughter, Emily. I stared at my own name until the letters blurred. Beloved daughter. The words almost made me laugh. Not because they were funny. Because they were cruel. Beloved daughters are not erased. Beloved daughters are not abandoned. Beloved daughters are not declared dead because they fell in love. The old woman squeezed my hand. I'm so sorry. I nodded, unable to speak. When I got home, Daniel knew something was wrong before I said a single word. He met me at the door. You've been crying. I handed him the church bulletin. He read it once. Then again. His face slowly changed from confusion to disbelief. To anger I had never seen before. No. His voice was barely above a whisper. No, she didn't. I nodded. She did. He looked at me with tears in his own eyes. I married you. Yes. I've lived with you for almost 14 years. Yes. And your own mother convinced people you died? I couldn't answer. Daniel slammed his hand against the kitchen counter. The sound startled Sophie, now 10 years old, who peeked around the hallway. Dad? His expression changed instantly. He forced a smile. Everything's okay, sweetheart. Children know when adults lie. Sophie looked at me. Mom? I wiped my face. I'm okay. She walked over and hugged me without another question. Sometimes children understand love better than adults ever will. That night, after Sophie went to bed, Daniel sat beside me on the couch. What do you want to do? I don't know. You could confront her. I stared at the bulletin. I've spent 14 years trying to convince myself she still loved me somewhere deep inside. He stayed silent. I don't think that's true anymore. The room felt unbearably quiet. Finally, Daniel asked, Do you want answers? I whispered, yes. Then let's get them. A week later, we drove back to my hometown. Nothing had changed. The diner still smelled like fresh coffee. The barber shop still had the faded spinning pole outside. The church bell rang every hour. Even the old oak tree in front of my childhood home had grown taller. Everything looked familiar. Except me. People glanced at me as I walked down Main Street. Some smiled politely. Others froze. One elderly man dropped his newspaper. A woman crossing the street stopped in the middle of traffic. A teenager whispered to his friend and pointed directly at me. Within minutes, people began gathering. I heard someone whisper, "That's her." Another voice replied, "It can't be." An older woman covered her mouth. I attended the memorial. A little girl tugged on her grandmother's sleeve. "Grandma, why is everyone staring?" The grandmother never answered. She couldn't stop looking at me. I felt like a ghost wandering through my own hometown. Eventually, someone stepped forward. It was Mr. Harris. My old high school history teacher. His hair had turned completely white. He looked at me for a very long time. Then tears rolled down his cheeks. "Emily?" I smiled weakly. "It's really me." He reached out with shaking hands and touched my shoulder. As though he needed proof. "My God." He started crying openly. "I prayed for your soul." "So did everyone else," another woman whispered. A crowd slowly surrounded me. Questions came from every direction. "What happened? Where have you been? Why did your mother tell us?" Nobody finished the sentence. Nobody needed to. Mr. Harris looked heartbroken. "Margaret said losing you nearly killed her." I felt something inside me shatter. "She told you that?" He nodded. "She cried every Sunday." Another woman added quietly, "She kept your picture in her Bible." Someone else said, "She spoke about you with so much grief." I almost laughed again. The irony was unbearable. She had built a monument to a daughter she chose to destroy. Then an elderly voice rose from the back of the crowd. I always knew something wasn't right. Everyone turned. It was Mrs. Evelyn Carter. She had lived next door to us for nearly 20 years. She walked slowly toward me with the help of a cane. Her eyes were sharp despite her age. She stopped only a few feet away. I saw things nobody else did. The crowd fell silent. Mrs. Carter looked directly into my eyes. "Your mother burned every photograph of you." A gasp rippled through the crowd. "But," Mrs. Carter continued, "she missed one." My heart stopped. She reached into her worn handbag. Carefully. Slowly. Then she pulled out an old envelope. Inside was a faded photograph. It showed my father sitting on the porch, laughing. I was beside him, maybe 8 years old, missing my 2 front teeth, holding a melting ice cream cone. Mother stood behind us. She was smiling. A real smile. The kind I hadn't seen since before Dad died. Mrs. Carter handed me the picture. I took this. Tears poured down my face. I kept it because something in my heart told me one day, you'd come back. Before I could thank her, she leaned closer. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Emily." I looked up. "There is something else." "What is it?" She glanced toward my mother's house. Then back at me. "The day your mother told everyone you had died." Mrs. Carter's lips trembled. I heard her say something she thought no one else would ever hear. I felt my heartbeat quicken. What did she say? Mrs. Carter closed her eyes for a moment. Then she whispered the sentence that changed everything. "Now no one will ever know what I did." The photograph slipped from my shaking hands and fluttered to the ground. The crowd stood frozen. And for the first time in my life, I realized this story wasn't only about rejection. My mother wasn't just hiding me. She was hiding something else. Sometimes the truth doesn't arrive with a scream. Sometimes it knocks softly, carrying a dusty box, an old letter, and a secret that has been buried for decades. The sentence Mrs. Carter whispered refused to leave my mind. "Now no one will ever know what I did." It echoed through my thoughts as Daniel and I drove away from the growing crowd. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say. For years, I had convinced myself my mother hated me because I married against her wishes. Now, that explanation suddenly felt too small. Too simple. People don't erase their own child from existence over a disagreement. Not like this. Not with such careful planning. Not for 12 years. Daniel finally broke the silence. What if she's hiding something bigger? I stared out the window. I don't know if I even want to know. He reached across the console and took my hand. You've spent half your life carrying questions. Whatever the truth is, you deserve it. I nodded, but my stomach tightened with every mile. Instead of driving home, we stopped outside Mrs. Carter's little white cottage. She had invited us to return after sunset. I'll show you something, she had said. I was too afraid to tell anyone before. The porch light was already on when we arrived. Mrs. Carter opened the door before I could knock. I've been waiting. Her voice was gentle, but there was a sadness in it that hadn't been there earlier. The house smelled of lavender and old books. Everything looked exactly as I remembered from childhood. The same lace curtains. The same rocking chair. Even the grandfather clock still ticked loudly in the hallway. She motioned for us to sit. Without saying another word, she disappeared into a bedroom. When she returned, she carried a small wooden box wrapped in a faded blue blanket. She placed it on the coffee table with extraordinary care. I've kept this hidden for 18 years. My heartbeat quickened. What's inside? She looked directly at me. Pieces of your father. For a moment, I didn't understand. Then she slowly opened the lid. Inside were letters. Photographs. An old wristwatch. A leather wallet. And a worn journal tied together with a thin red ribbon. My breath caught. Those belonged to Dad. Mrs. Carter nodded. They were supposed to belong to you. I looked up in confusion. My mother told me everything was buried with him. Mrs. Carter sighed. That wasn't true. Daniel frowned. Then how did you get them? Mrs. Carter folded her trembling hands. The night after your father's funeral. Her voice grew quieter. I saw Margaret standing beside the trash barrels behind your house. I frowned. She was throwing these away. My chest tightened. No. I couldn't understand why. Your father's things meant everything to him. She looked toward the box. So after she went inside, I climbed into the trash and rescued them. Tears blurred my vision. She had climbed into the garbage to save the last pieces of my father, while my own mother had thrown them away. Mrs. Carter gently picked up the journal. I tried to give these to you many times. What stopped you? Your mother. I felt cold. She warned me. Mrs. Carter's voice shook. She said if I ever contacted you, she'd make sure I regretted it. Daniel's jaw tightened. What kind of person threatens an old neighbor? Mrs. Carter gave a tired smile. A frightened one. I slowly untied the faded ribbon around the journal. The cover was cracked with age. Dad's handwriting filled every page. The familiar loops and careful letters instantly brought tears to my eyes. For a while, I simply ran my fingers across the paper. It felt like touching his hand again. I opened to the first page. If Emily ever reads this. I stopped breathing. He had written my name. Not my daughter. Not my child. Emily. I swallowed hard and continued. If you're reading this, it means life didn't go the way I hoped. Tears rolled silently down my cheeks. Your mother wasn't always the woman people know today. I looked at Daniel. He looked back at me, equally stunned. I kept reading. She loved deeply once. She laughed loudly. She danced in the kitchen while making breakfast. A memory flashed through my mind. I remembered her spinning me around when I was 5 years old. I remembered flour on her cheeks. Music playing on the old radio. That woman had existed. Once. But after my business failed. I paused. Business? Dad had always told me he simply retired. I read faster. The debt nearly destroyed us. My eyes widened. Margaret blamed me. She blamed the world. Eventually. The handwriting became shakier. She started blaming you. My hands trembled. No. Mrs. Carter quietly handed me a glass of water. I couldn't drink. I kept reading. She believes if you had never been born, our lives would have been easier. The room became painfully silent. Daniel whispered, Emily. But I barely heard him. Every word felt like another stone crushing my chest. I argued with her countless times. I begged her never to say those things where you could hear them. She always promised she didn't mean them. But promises became lies. My vision blurred again. I remembered all the little comments growing up. You always make everything harder. You were such a difficult child. You ruined my plans. I had thought they were spoken in anger. Now I realized. She had believed them. I turned another page. Near the bottom, Dad had written something that made my heart stop. If anything happens to me, Emily must know the truth. Beneath it was another folded sheet tucked inside the journal. It had never been opened. My name was written across the front. For Emily. I carefully unfolded it. The paper crackled with age. Dad's handwriting filled only one page. Sweetheart. Just that one word made me cry. None of what happened in this family was ever your fault. The tears came harder. If your mother pushes you away someday. I froze. He knew. Years before his death. He had known. Please don't spend your life chasing someone determined to run from love. Daniel quietly wrapped an arm around my shoulders. I continued reading. One day you will understand that broken people sometimes break the people who love them most. Forgive if you can. Walk away if you must. But never believe you were unworthy of being loved. I held the letter against my chest. For 18 years. Those words had waited for me. Then Mrs. Carter reached into the wooden box one last time. There is something else. She removed a small cassette tape. The label simply read. April 14th. I frowned. What's on it? I don't know. Have you listened? She shook her head immediately. No. Why not? Because your father handed it to me 2 days before he died. She swallowed. He said. Her voice broke. If anything ever happens, give this to Emily. Daniel stared at the tape. My hand shook as I took it. What if it's just family memories? Mrs. Carter slowly shook her head. I don't think it is. Why? She looked directly into my eyes. Because when he gave it to me. She paused, struggling to continue. He had tears in his eyes. I turned the cassette over. There was one more line written in faded ink. The truth begins here. I looked at Daniel. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. Because somehow. We both knew that once we pressed play. There would be no going back. Some voices never really leave us. They wait in old recordings, forgotten letters, and memories we were never meant to hear. As I held the cassette tape in my hands, it felt heavier than anything I had ever carried. It wasn't just plastic. It wasn't just magnetic tape. It was 18 years of unanswered questions. 18 years of silence. 18 years of wondering why my own mother had looked into my eyes as if I were someone she wished had never existed. Daniel drove us back to our hotel without saying much. Neither of us wanted to hear that tape in a stranger's house. Neither of us wanted anyone else present when my father's voice returned after nearly 2 decades. The room was quiet except for the hum of the old air conditioner. Daniel searched every drawer until he found something neither of us expected. A dusty cassette player the hotel owner kept for guests who enjoyed old music. He plugged it in. For a long moment, neither of us moved. My fingers hovered over the play button. "I don't know if I'm ready," I whispered. Daniel gently covered my trembling hand. "I know. But whatever's on this tape, you've already survived the worst part." I looked at him through tear-filled eyes. "I survived because you never stopped reminding me I was alive." He smiled, though his own eyes were wet. "And tonight, maybe your father will remind you too." I took a slow breath. Then I pressed play. A soft hiss filled the room. Static crackled. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then a voice. Older than I remembered. Weaker than I remembered. But unmistakably his. "Emily." The moment I heard him say my name, my heart broke all over again. I covered my mouth to keep from sobbing. "I don't know if you'll ever hear this." There was a pause. "I hope you do." Another pause. "If you're listening. I wasn't able to protect you." I bent forward, tears falling onto my knees. "I'm sorry," he continued. "So very sorry." His breathing sounded tired. Labored. "I spent years believing I could keep this family together. I was wrong." The tape crackled again. "I need you to know something your mother may never admit. None of this. None of it. Was because of you." I squeezed Daniel's hand so tightly my fingers hurt. "I lost my business. I made terrible investments. I trusted people I shouldn't have trusted. I buried us in debt. I was ashamed. I told everyone I retired because admitting the truth felt impossible. I remembered the story I had been told my entire life. Dad had simply wanted a quieter life. No. That had been another lie. I blamed myself every day." He inhaled deeply. "But your mother." Another long silence. "She couldn't live with the shame. So she searched for someone else to blame." I closed my eyes. I already knew what was coming. "She chose you." The room became painfully still. I argued with her. I begged her. I reminded her that you were only a little girl. His voice cracked. "She always cried afterward. She always promised she'd change. But every promise lasted only until the next disappointment." Then came words I never expected to hear. "I stayed. I stayed because I thought leaving would destroy you. I stayed because I believed I could protect you. I stayed because I loved both of you." Another long pause. "And maybe." His voice became almost a whisper. "Maybe staying was my greatest mistake." I couldn't breathe. All those years, I had wished he had lived longer. Now I wondered if he had carried unbearable guilt every single day. The tape continued. "If something happens to me, I need you to do one thing. Live. Really live. Fall in love. Have children. Laugh loudly. Dance in your kitchen. Eat birthday cake for breakfast if you want." I laughed through my tears. It sounded exactly like something he would say. "Don't let pain become your inheritance. End it with you." The words settled deep inside me. Don't let pain become your inheritance. End it with you. Then his voice grew quieter. "There is one last truth." I straightened immediately. "I never told you how I died." I frowned. The official story had always been simple. A heart attack. Suddenly. Peacefully. "I did have a heart attack." He continued. "But it wasn't the first one." Daniel and I exchanged confused glances. "The first happened 6 months earlier." "I survived. I recovered. But I overheard something while your mother thought I was asleep." My heartbeat quickened. I heard her tell her sister. He stopped speaking for several seconds. The silence felt endless. When he finally continued, his voice was shaking. If he dies, at least all this suffering will finally end. The tears running down my face turned cold. I don't believe your mother wanted me dead. I believe she wanted the pain to stop. But somewhere along the way, she stopped seeing people. She only saw burdens. The recording hissed again. If she ever turns that same pain toward you, I need you to remember. Broken hearts can become dangerous when they refuse to heal. Then, the recording changed. There was another voice. At first I couldn't recognize it. Then I froze. It was my mother. She sounded younger. Angrier. You always choose her over me. Dad answered softly. She's our daughter. No. Mother snapped. She's the reason everything fell apart. You know that's not true. If she had never been born. The recording suddenly filled with shouting. A chair scraped across the floor. Something shattered. Then, silence. Complete silence. The tape clicked. It had reached the end. For several minutes, nobody spoke. The room felt unbearably heavy. Daniel finally whispered. She really believed it. I nodded slowly. Yes. Not because it was true. Because pain had convinced her it was. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about one thing. If my father had trusted Mrs. Carter with the tape, what else had he trusted someone with? I returned to her house before sunrise. She seemed surprised to see me so early. You listened. I nodded. She didn't ask what was on it. She could read the answer on my face. Instead, she quietly walked toward a bookshelf. Without saying a word, she reached behind a row of old novels. Then she removed a thin brown envelope. I hoped I'd never have to give you this. What is it? Your father's lawyer brought it here 3 weeks after his funeral. I frowned. Why didn't anyone tell me? Mrs. Carter looked away. Because your mother intercepted the letter addressed to you. My stomach dropped. She opened my mail? Mrs. Carter nodded. When she discovered what was inside. What did she do? She demanded it. You didn't give it to her? Mrs. Carter shook her head. No. I lied. I told her it had been destroyed. My eyes filled again. You protected me. She smiled sadly. I promised your father I would. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a copy of my father's will. Most of it was ordinary. Personal belongings. Savings. The house. Then, one paragraph stopped me cold. To my daughter Emily. I swallowed. If she is ever denied access to the truth. Denied access? He had anticipated this. I kept reading. There exists one final document held securely by my attorney, to be released only if Emily personally requests it. I looked up at Mrs. Carter. What's the document? She answered so quietly I almost didn't hear her. A signed confession. My pulse thundered. A confession? Mrs. Carter nodded. Your father once told me. She took a deep breath. That it contained the one secret your mother feared more than losing her family. I stared at the will. Then back at her. What secret? Mrs. Carter's eyes filled with tears. I don't know. But your father said. She hesitated. Once you read it, you'll finally understand why your mother decided it was easier to tell the world you were dead. Then let the truth about your life be discovered. What could be so terrible that a mother would rather bury her living daughter than face the truth? I had asked myself that question for 12 years. Now, the answer was waiting inside a sealed envelope. And somehow, I wasn't sure I wanted it anymore. Daniel squeezed my hand as we stood outside the office of my father's old attorney. The brass nameplate on the door had changed. The lawyer who had known my father had long since retired. His son now managed the practice. Still, the records remained. The past had been waiting patiently. The receptionist looked at the copy of my father's will. Then at my driver's license. After a few minutes, she disappeared into the back office. Every second felt like an hour. Finally, the attorney walked toward us carrying a thick cream-colored envelope. He didn't smile. "You must be Emily." I nodded. He looked at me with an expression somewhere between sympathy and relief. "I've been instructed to release this only to you." He paused. "Your father came here 3 weeks before he passed away." My chest tightened. He spent nearly 4 hours writing and signing documents. The attorney gently placed the envelope on the table. He said one sentence I'll never forget. "What did he say?" The attorney looked directly into my eyes. He said, "One day my daughter will wonder why her mother erased her. When that day comes, please let my words reach her." I closed my eyes. Even after all these years, Dad had still been protecting me. We thanked the attorney and drove to the small park where my father used to push me on the swings every Sunday afternoon. The old oak trees were taller now. The paint on the benches had faded. But one swing still creaked gently in the breeze. I sat there, the envelope resting in my lap. Daniel sat beside me. "I'll stay. You don't have to read it alone." I nodded. Carefully, I broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten confession. Every page carried my father's unmistakable handwriting. At the very top he had written, "The truth I couldn't tell while I was alive." My hand shook. I began reading. "Emily, if you are holding this letter, then everything I feared has happened. Your mother has pushed you away completely. I prayed every day that she would choose love instead." Tears blurred the page. "There is something you deserve to know. You were never an unwanted child." I stopped. For years, I had secretly wondered if my mother had regretted having me. Now I kept reading. "The day you were born was the happiest day of my life. Your mother cried while holding you because she thought you were the most beautiful baby she had ever seen." A lump formed in my throat. That image didn't match the woman I had known. But it matched the photographs. The ones where she smiled without pretending. Everything changed years later. "Not because of you. Because of guilt." I frowned. "Guilt?" "When my business collapsed, I borrowed money from dangerous people. To protect our family, your mother secretly sold the land her parents had left her." I looked up. "She never told me that." Daniel shook his head. "No." I continued. "She believed losing that land meant losing the last piece of her parents. She never forgave herself. Eventually, she couldn't bear admitting we had both made mistakes. So she convinced herself there had to be someone responsible. She chose the easiest person. The child who could never defend herself." A tear landed on the page. I wiped it away before the ink could blur. I watched bitterness replace grief. Pride replace kindness. Shame replace love. By the time I realized she needed help, she refused every attempt. I read the final pages more slowly. After my death, she would have 2 choices. Face the truth. Or erase every reminder of it. If she erased you, it would never be because you deserved it. It would be because looking at you reminded her of every decision she couldn't forgive herself for. The final paragraph was only a few lines long. "Emily, please don't spend your life trying to earn love from someone who no longer knows how to give it. Your worth was never determined by your mother's wounds. It never will be. Go home. Love your husband. Hold your daughter close. And when she disappoints you someday, love her harder. End the story here. Don't let it become hers." The letter slipped into my lap. I cried harder than I had in years. Not because I finally understood my mother, but because my father had spent his final days trying to save the little girl inside me. The girl who had believed she wasn't enough. Daniel wrapped his arms around me. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The wind rustled the trees above us. Children laughed somewhere across the park. Life continued. Just as it always had. 3 weeks later, I made one final trip to my childhood home. Not to argue. Not to beg. Not to ask why. Simply to say goodbye. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The flower beds were overgrown. Paint peeled from the porch railing. Time had quietly settled over everything. I knocked. After a moment, the door opened. Margaret stood there. Older. Thinner. Her once dark hair almost completely silver. For several seconds, neither of us moved. She looked into my face as though searching for someone she had tried very hard to forget. Finally she whispered, "Why did you come?" I smiled sadly. "I came to return something." I handed her a small envelope. Inside was the faded photograph Mrs. Carter had saved all those years ago. The one where the three of us stood together, laughing, before life became unbearable. Mother looked at it. Her hands began to tremble. She traced my father's face with one finger. Then mine. A tear escaped before she quickly wiped it away. "I don't deserve this." "No." I answered gently. "You don't." She lowered her head. "I told everyone you were dead." "I know." "I burned your photographs." "I know." "I told your cousins never to speak your name." "I know." Her shoulders shook. For the first time in my life. She looked small. Not powerful. Not frightening. Just broken. "I wanted to hate you." Her voice cracked. "But every birthday." She covered her mouth. "I baked your favorite chocolate cake." My heart ached. "I never ate it." Another tear fell. "I threw it away every year." Silence stretched between us. Finally she whispered, "I don't know how to fix this." I looked at her for a long time. Then I answered with complete honesty. "You can't." Her eyes closed. "I know." "I didn't come for an apology." "Then why?" I smiled through tears. "Because my daughter asked me something last night." Margaret slowly looked up. "What did she ask?" "She asked why she doesn't have a grandma." A painful silence followed. I continued. "I realized I had two choices. I could fill her heart with anger. Or I could simply tell her that sometimes people carry pain they never learn how to put down." Mother began crying openly. "I failed you." "Yes." "I failed as a mother." "Yes." "I don't deserve forgiveness." I took a slow breath. "Forgiveness isn't something you deserve. It's something I choose." She stared at me. "I forgive you." Her knees gave way. She sank onto the porch steps, sobbing into her trembling hands. Not because everything was suddenly healed, but because someone she had buried years ago had come back long enough to set herself free. I stepped back. "I hope one day you find peace." She looked up through tears. "Emily." It was the first time she had spoken my name in 12 years. "I love you." The words hung in the air. Too late to repair the past. But perhaps not too late to be true. I smiled gently. "I believe a part of you always did." Then I turned around. This time, I didn't look back. Because I wasn't the little girl waiting on the porch anymore. I was a mother. And at home, a little girl was waiting to run into my arms. When I opened my front door, Sophie came racing toward me. "Mom." She wrapped herself around my waist. I missed you. I laughed through tears and lifted her into my arms. I missed you too. She looked at my face. Were you crying? A little. Are you okay? I kissed her forehead. I am now. That evening, we baked a chocolate cake together. The kitchen became covered in flour. Sophie accidentally cracked an egg onto the floor. She looked terrified. I'm sorry. I laughed. A real laugh. The kind I hadn't heard from myself in years. It's only a mess. We cleaned it together. Then we danced around the kitchen while the cake baked. Just as my father once hoped I would. And in that warm little kitchen, surrounded by laughter instead of silence, I finally understood what he meant. Pain can travel through generations. So can love. Someone simply has to decide which one ends with them.